Almost every vault in Fallout is horrifying, because that's the point. They were meant to test what people would do in horrible situations and hide some of the most disturbing mysteries. Some will make you question the sanity of the devs that created them. So, with that cheerful note out of the way, let's go traumatize ourselves. The all clear. Clearance that never came. You know what might be the cruelest lie Vault-Tec ever told? It's not the experiments. It wasn't the marketing. Not even the vague and sometimes threatening excuse of it's for your own good. It was the idea that one day, someone would press a button, speak into a microphone, or even just play a recorded message, and the people of the vault would hear an all clear, a signal that says, okay, it's safe now, open the door. Because across Fallout, we keep seeing vaults that were clearly built around that expectation. A timer, a schedule, a plan for something to happen that would make everything okay again. Restore things to how they once were, but then nothing. There's no broadcast. There's no coordinated reopening. No instances or implications of a phase 2. Not even an annoying ad break from Vault-Tec to remind you that help is on the way. A better life underground? More like a better burial. Our first big mystery may sound simple, but in reality, it's huge. Was there ever an all clear at all? Or was it always a story Vault-Tec told to keep people compliant? Because once you start looking, the evidence doesn't just point one way. It points in multiple directions. And that's what makes this scary. The promise of wait it out, then rebuild, that never came true for many, if anyone. Here's something to think about. Most vaults only make psychological sense if the residents believed the door would open eventually. Vault-Tec didn't sell the vaults as tombs. They sold them for survival, a temporary shelter for a permanent future. And across the series, you see vaults built with long-term infrastructure, education, medical wings, and social spaces. Like the vault is supposed to be a bridge, not a coffin. That only works if the residents believe there's a finish line, an end to the waiting, a moment where the vault becomes the seed of the next world. But here's the problem with that line of logic. Fallout also shows vaults where the finish line was never real. Simply put, some vaults had the Open Sesame code baked in, while others never had code to open at all, or were only to open after the lab rats had completed their required task. That's because the Vault program doesn't behave like one unified plan. It behaves like multiple plans wearing the same logo. For instance, you've got vaults that open on a schedule, clearly meant to rejoin the surface at a specific point. Vault 8, Vault 13, and Vault 76 come to mind, and then you've got vaults with orders that effectively translate to staying sealed indefinitely, even when the outside world becomes survivable. Vaults 101, 81, and 51 represent that mindset. So if a single all-clear signal existed, why would Vault-Tec need both? Why build some vaults with explicit or implied ultimate goals of rebuilding humanity, and others that come off like do not enter, dead inside? Let's think ahead here. Because once you see that inconsistency, the mystery shifts from why didn't they open to who was supposed to tell them to open in the first place. That brings us to the conveniently missing button. Who was really holding the all clear? First, let's review. An all clear is a chain of authority, and Fallout is full of both broken and connected chains. For an all clear to work, somebody has to survive the war with enough power to monitor conditions, communicate with vaults, and enforce the plan. That means infrastructure. That means continuity. You know who I'm talking about. Yet we don't see that second act in a clean, centralized way. We see fragments, we see isolated instructions, we see vaults that 90% of the time only open because something goes wrong. Equipment failure, internal collapse, outside interference, anything except a smooth exit, which strongly suggests one of three things. 1. The all-clear system existed for every vault and continuously failed outside of a few exceptions. 2. It existed for all vaults, but was selective on who left and who stayed. Or 3. It never existed, not for every individual vault at least, because the vaults were never built for rescue. They were built for containment. One thing is certain, regardless if Vault-Tec intended for the all-clear signal to go off, or if it was only for a select few, the next mystery is far more sinister. Data collection, research, or reassurance? Alright, so the all-clear signal never came for a lot of vaults, and we know the stories of those that did get the signal, or at least thought they would get it. That's all fine and dandy. But Vault-Tec still had one reason to build all this. Data. Not just the kind of data that you tend to scroll down to the end to press accept or turn off cookies on. The kind of data that Vault-Tec thought justified putting hundreds of people into confined spaces to conduct terrible, or at least unethical experiments on them. Let's get into our next mystery. If every vault was an experiment, where did the results go? Because you don't spend billions, even trillions, building a continent-wide series of combination home and laboratory just to leave the paperwork in a basement terminal or piled up on a desk somewhere in the many abandoned or destroyed levels of the vaults we explore. Once you take a deeper look inside how Vault-Tec tested and collected its data, the ways vaults either succeed or collapse start looking less like vaults went wrong and more like someone was supposed to be watching. Let's think. Vault experiments only make sense if Vault-Tec had a way to collect and compare outcomes. Most vaults aren't simply weird living conditions or stuffy lab coat-filled geek centers. They're structured tests, long-term, decades and centuries in the making, controlled variables, overseer, authority, lots of terminals, notebooks, and logbooks, surveys, medical records, behavioral notes, the kind of stuff that's useless to many unless it gets compiled into a bigger picture. So either Vault-Tec had a collection system, or the entire program was just corporate sadism with extra steps. And we know Vault-Tec too well for it to simply be corporate sadism, most of the time. Realistically, there are only a few ways Vault-Tec could have done it. Number 1, central collection, pre-war style. Vault-Tec planned to gather everything through a central authority. Pre-war America in Fallout loves centralized control. Government contracts, corporate networks, regional HQs, layers upon layers of managers. It would be totally on brand for Vault-Tec to say every vault reports up a chain. After all, many vaults operated under the assumption that either there would never be a nuclear war, or that any situation in a real nuclear war would be far less worse than it turned out to be. Overseer files get sent via email. Data gets copied and stapled together. Reports go to a regional office, then to a main hub. That would mean the vaults were never the end goal, which we already know is obvious. They were field stations. The real drop-off point was a location revealed to us as far back as Fallout 2, the Enclave Vault Research Control, listed as still active at the time the game takes place. Except that the moment the bombs drop, this method has a flaw, a big one. Humans don't survive long enough to manage Phase 2. If the collection plan relied on people doing their jobs, it collapses instantly after October 23, 2077. Even if some executive figures survived, you'd need transport, security, stable power, working communications, and a staffed operation that can last centuries. Not days, not months, not years, centuries. Now, if you've ever explored the Wasteland, and let's face it, the outside world is basically a tutorial on what happens when supply chains die, meaning that if and when the data was ever collected, it probably wasn't because somebody drove around with a clipboard. Option number 1 obviously doesn't work, so let's get into option number 2. Now, this is one that, when you hear it, simply feels like the real Vault-Tec solution. Automated uplinks and silent telemetry. Vault-Tec could have, and even did, built the vaults to report automatically. You don't need a courier or 6 if you have a network. You don't need a manager if you have a system that just pings home at a designated point in time. Could be once a week, or it could be once the experiment has run its course and failed or succeeded. Basic stuff like population counts, medical metrics, incident reports, resource consumption, anything that could be boiled down into numbers and transmitted. You can imagine Vault-Tec loving this because it keeps subjects unaware. They don't feel watched, but they are. On every camera in the hallway, on every word they type on a terminal, even when they're asleep. If this is the method they used, then every vault wasn't just a shelter, it was a sensor, a data node, a living spreadsheet. And that leads to the creepiest question of this section. If the vaults were transmitting, who was receiving it? The receiver problem. Vault-Tec, the government, or something else. A signal implies a listener, and Fallout is full of potential listeners that never announce themselves. It could have been Vault-Tec corporate. It could have been the Enclave. It could have been the Zetans or other aliens overhead planning to experiment or conquer our world. The real reason this mystery works is because the games keep showing you pieces of oversight, notes that imply supervision, protocols that imply reporting, systems that imply external control, without ever showing you the clean HQ that ties it all together. When you eliminate the impossible and improbable, only 2 possibilities are left. Either the receiver died, or the receiver survived and stayed hidden. But there's one more possibility that explains something important. The third and final option is this. The simplest explanation, really. The data never left because it was meant to be retrieved later. Vault-Tec might have planned a physical post-war retrieval operation, not a live network. Think about it. If you're expecting to reclaim America later, you don't need the data right away. You just need it preserved. And so you store it locally. You lock it behind overseer access. You build redundancies, you make sure it survives time. Then, when the vaults open, the collection begins. A team comes through and scoops it all up, clean and intact. That would turn vaults into time capsules, waiting for a landlord who would never need to show up. But here's the twist that makes this whole mystery feel personal, as though it was meant for someone. If the data was supposed to be retrieved, why do we, the player, keep finding it? That's the mystery, isn't it? As far as its show, it's because nobody ever came. Somebody came and only took some of it. or somebody is still collecting it, and we're just too late to see the tracks. And if that last one is true, then the Vault program never ended. It just went quiet. A doozy of a revelation, huh? But our next big mystery might cause you to scratch your head further than you were before. Unfinished vaults. Incomplete versus incompetent. Okay, so if the all clear never came, and the data pipeline is still a question mark, what gives? How is Vault-Tec both this monolithic entity responsible for so much in the world of Fallout, yet can't even create a working product without at least something going wrong? Right there is the next Vault mystery. Don't worry, it'll sound obvious once you hear it asked out loud. What about the vaults that weren't even finished? Fallout loves showing you Vault-Tec's grand plan like it was this clean, controlled machine. In spite of that, the Wasteland keeps revealing something messier. Some vaults weren't sealed masterpieces. In fact, some were little more than construction sites when the world ended. Because once you ask this, you're not asking what was the experiment. You're asking how many vaults were never ready to run the experiment at all? Or worse, what if the fact they weren't complete was the experiment? Despite all the billboards, radio ads, logos you see everywhere, the network of 122 known vaults wasn't complete when the bombs fell. Vault-Tec sells the vaults like a finished safety net, keeping you safe when the world ends. But the evidence suggests parts of that net were still being stitched together. You can physically see it in places like Vault 88, with unfinished wings, active construction areas, and that feeling of this was supposed to be bigger, but time ran out. And this isn't the only example of unfinished construction, even as far back as the second game in the series. You had examples of unfinished or under construction vaults, from the fake Vault 13 in Fallout 2, to Vault 114 in Fallout 4, to Vault 63 in Fallout 76. It only reinforces the point. If multiple vaults were incomplete, then the Vault program wasn't just morally broken, it was logistically unstable. And that leads to the following questions. Were people promised spots in vaults that couldn't take them? What did Vault-Tec do with unfinished vaults when the countdown hit 0? And ultimately, did unfinished vaults become experiments by accident or by design? Certainly scarier than the dog eating your homework, huh? Let's tackle the first question to start. If a vault wasn't finished, then a lot of people who paid for salvation may have been sold a seat on a lifeboat that didn't exist yet. Vault-Tec didn't sell maybe. They sold certainty, plans, assignments, a spot with you and your family's name on it. But if the door opens and the interior is still scaffolding and rubble, what happens to the families assigned there? They don't get a refund. They get a locked door, if a door is even built, and a sky full of fire. That means some of the Vault program's biggest casualties might have happened before the experiments ever started, just from unfinished infrastructure. Going ahead with the second question, the simplest answer is likely nothing, but let's think deeper about it. An unfinished vault forces an ugly decision, and Vault-Tec loves ugly decisions. If the vault isn't ready, you've got a few options, and all of them are bad. Option A, seal people inside anyway and figure it out later. This was exactly what happened to Vault 63, and it didn't quite turn out so well. Next option, Option B, use the vault as a temporary shelter. We see this happen with Vault 114, abandoned and later used by the local mobsters as an interrogation site. And finally, Option C, abandon it and pretend it was never part of the promise. And in a company built on secrecy and control, Option C is dangerously realistic. If Vault-Tec abandoned unfinished vaults, that's not a project delay. That's mass murder by bureaucracy. But if they didn't abandon them, then you get a new nightmare. Last question for this subject. Did unfinished vaults become experiments by accident? A half-built vault creates its own experiment even if Vault-Tec never designed one. Think about what being unfinished means underground. Bad seals, incomplete life support, unfinished medical bays, missing security systems, unmapped tunnels, no clean boundaries. That turns survival into a chaotic gamble between life and death, all because there wasn't enough time or effort put into finishing what should have been a safe shelter. Not because Vault-Tec planned it, but because Vault-Tec failed to finish the cage. And since we know for a fact that this has happened at least a few times, then some vault horrors aren't twisted science or science for science's sake. They're what happens when construction failure meets the apocalypse. And now, we hit the part that ties back to the data mystery in the creepiest way. The question behind the question, if a vault was unfinished, was it ever supposed to be counted? Unfinished vaults might explain why the vault list feels incomplete and inconsistent across the series. If some vaults never went live, Vault-Tec might have buried them in paperwork. No residents, no logs, no overseer reports, no public record. Just a number on a blueprint and a door that was never meant to open. Which means there could be ghost vaults we never see, not because they're unimportant, but because they were embarrassing or incriminating. The unfinished vault problem isn't just about construction, it's about missing history. Vaults that vanish from the story because they never became a story. And if that's true, then the next mystery is brutal, as it's not just the unfinished vaults that go on to have a legacy, it's the finished ones as well. But what happens when that legacy is slowly shifted or corrupted? Or is it simply vault tech getting more success than what they ever could have hoped for? Vault mythology, mystery, history, hysteria. Now we hit the part that's way harder to explain with terminals and charts, because some vaults don't just fail. Some vaults become stories. Some of them have positive legacies, ones that went on to help the area or save the world. But others performed quite the opposite. They became the kind people whisper about like they're haunted houses. The kind traders detour around even if it costs them days. The kind even raiders won't raid because, nah man, that place is cursed. Which only begs the question, why do certain vaults stop being locations and start being myths? Because this isn't just simple wasteland superstition. In Fallout, myth is usually what's left when the truth is too horrifying to survive intact. Deathclaws started out as myths, as did the Enclave and Institute. It was only later on that people learned just how real and dangerous they were. Starting with the basics, a vault can outlive its facts. Most wastelanders don't learn vault history from terminals or books. They learn it from rumors, word of mouth from the town drunk or a local gossiper. Think about how knowledge travels in the wasteland. There's no internet, no textbooks, no stable government archives. Just caravans, bars, mercs, and old people telling stories with missing pieces. Maybe the radio will give a news story, but even then, no one's listening to a radio all day, every day. So when something terrifying happens in a vault, the exact details don't spread. The vibe does though. That's how a vault becomes a myth. The facts decay, but the fear doesn't. And the fear sticks to certain vaults for specific reasons. Patterns you can actually track. The first pattern is probably the most obvious. A vault that eats people. Vault myths often start with one simple outcome. People go in. You wait for an hour, a day, a week. After a month has passed, it becomes apparent that they won't come back. You don't need to understand FEV or social experiments to know what that means. If a scavenger vanishes, if a caravan crew never returns, if a raider band or gang goes inside and only one runs out screaming, you don't get a case study. You get a warning story. Because a vault becomes a myth the moment it develops a reputation for being a one-way door. And a lot of vaults in the Fallout world have that reputation for one reason or another, but it's the ones that don't earn that reputation that makes the situation all the worse. Because sometimes the vault isn't just dangerous. Sometimes it's actively misleading. Some vaults don't look dirty, worn down, broken. Some are ones that, upon first inspection, look safe, clean, working machinery, coated in bright colors. That's the second pattern. It looks safe until you're already in too deep. Some vaults don't announce danger. They hide it. When it's not coated in 200 years of dirt and rust, the vault aesthetic is comforting by design. Clean corridors, bright lights, familiar signs. Even when it's rotting, it still looks like a form of safety at first glance. But anyone who has played a horror game or watched a scary movie knows what's up. That's why these vaults become the stuff of legend fast. They don't kill you, not immediately, not intentionally. They make you feel stupid for believing the myth of the vault in the first place. They're places where you can kick your feet up, take a sip of Nuka-Cola, and finally take a breath, free from the stress and horrors of the wasteland. And that's where it gets you. These are the vaults that create curses, because they punish curiosity. But myths don't form from traps or scares. Sometimes they form from something worse, something that changes the people who come back out. This is the third pattern you can tell the type of vault mythos by. Beyond the scares and comforts, it produces something else, something either long forgotten or something twisted and deformed. Survivors who don't sound human anymore. When a vault produces survivors who are wrong, it fuels myth faster than any corpse pile. A community can rationalize raiders. It can rationalize the dangers and products of radiation. But when somebody, or something, comes back, no longer recognizable, speaking gibberish, or they can't explain what happened without breaking down, or they start repeating the same phrase like it's a prayer, now you've got a story that spreads on its own. The vault becomes a myth factory. Not because people know what happened, but because the survivors prove something happened that won't fit into normal words. And here's where this connects to the vault tech data question in a nasty way. The less documentation a vault leaves behind, the more myth fills the gaps. Like it was said before, wastelanders rely on word of mouth more than text or actual data. Except when a vault has no clear logs, no coherent history, no visible experiment notes, people don't conclude that there's no information available. We aren't machines, after all. They conclude basic concepts such as haunted, cursed, a monster, ghosts, demons, whatever fits their worldview. And Fallout encourages this by making some vaults feel like they're infected by a presence, not just a problem. Think back to places like Vault 1-8, Vault 11, Vault 51, so on and so forth. It occurs not just once per game, it's practically a staple for there to be multiple in each game. So myth isn't the opposite of data. Myth is what happens when data gets erased, taken, forgotten, which leads to the sharpest question in this entire section. Did Vault-Tec want some vaults to become myths? After all, a feared vault is a controlled vault, even centuries later. If a vault becomes taboo, people avoid it. They don't salvage it, repurpose it, or settle near it. They most especially don't open doors that might reveal the truth. After all, that place is haunted. You shouldn't be going near it, lest you die, get transformed, or have something else happen to not only you, but to the rest of the wasteland as well. Mythology becomes a security system that runs without electricity, and that raises the possibility that some vault failures weren't failures at all. They were designed to become legends, to protect something inside, or to bury what happened so deep nobody would ever dig it back up. So what exactly was Vault-Tec hoping to accomplish with all this? Getting into that may be perhaps the biggest vault mystery of all. Vault criteria. Success? Alright, last piece of the puzzle. Once you've asked why the all-clear never came, where the data went or how it was collected, how many vaults were simply unfinished, and why some vaults turned into myths, you eventually run into the question Vault-Tec never wanted anyone to ask. What did Vault-Tec actually call a successful vault? It certainly wasn't a vault that closed and opened back up without issue. Vault-Tec wanted problems, Vault-Tec needed problems, they engineered problems in one vault and gave the solution to another vault. If their success criteria wasn't the simple idea of people surviving and rebuilding, then everything else suddenly makes sense. This is where the whole Vault program flips upside down. There's only one singular uncomfortable truth. Success wasn't survival. It was a statistic. Vault-Tec's success wasn't measured in lives saved. It was measured in outcomes produced. Look at the pattern across vault stories. So many vaults are built like they expect long-term stability, then have a single variable introduced that destroys stability on purpose. That isn't a shelter plan. That's a test. If survival was the goal, you remove variables. If data is the goal, you introduce them. And once you accept that, you can start guessing the real metrics. Metric number 1, compliance under pressure. Vault-Tec may have defined success as how controllable people are when isolated. A vault is the perfect controlled environment. Take vaults like Vault 101, with the ideal life so long as you never want to leave. Vault 8, a dystopia built on routine and identical identity. Vaults can only provide limited resources, limited exits, and a built-in authority figure. That's not just safety design, because the safety is only for the results Vault-Tec anticipated or wanted to begin with. That's behavior design, turning humans into mice, guinea pigs, or revealing the savage beast that lies beneath civilized nature. In that framework, a successful vault isn't peaceful, it's predictable. And that predictable behavior is incredibly valuable to someone who has made a business out of studying it. Metric 2, clean data, unhappy subjects. Vault 95, Vault 19, Vault 92. In each of these instances, and many more beyond those, Vault-Tec clearly cared more about usable data than the human cost. That explains why the all-clear never came for those types of vaults. You don't end the test early, you simply can't. You let it run until it produces a result, the desired result, or collapse. Collapse can be a result. If the experiment ends in disaster, that might still be successful if the data is recorded. Which brings us back to the creepiest part of the metric mystery. Who was this for? Put it in a frame of reference of what Vault-Tec clearly wanted for some of these vaults. Selecting winners for the next world. That's Vault-Tec's third metric, creating survivors and thriving groups to overcome the apocalypse and the wasteland. In certain instances, Vault-Tec had been using vaults to identify which kinds of societies are easiest to rebuild, and also the easiest to rule. Vault 11, Vault 75, Vault 51. Some vaults clearly feel like they were meant to create specific outputs, stable communities, specialized personnel, hardened survivors, all part of one obedient structure. In that model, vaults aren't just protection for experiments or homes, they're filters. And that ties directly into the unfinished vault problem, because for Vault-Tec, even failure can be a feature as the fourth metric of success. An unfinished vault isn't necessarily a mistake in this mindset. It's an extreme stress test. If you're measuring what breaks people or what forces adaptation, an unfinished vault produces chaos fast, while also not being liable to random factors that could accelerate or slow down the process. Think of it like doing a school or work project the night before it's due. Sure, it might not get you a perfect score, but it produces data fast. That means some vault nightmares might not be a plan that failed. They might be accelerated planning. And if and when those results leak onto the surface, you get the next outcome, the mythos. You get myths as a form of containment. That's the fifth and ultimate way Vault-Tec ensured that long after the war, their experiments, their test subjects, their data would remain secure, contained, and protected. After all, a vault that becomes a legend is a vault that stays undisturbed. If people fear a vault, they don't move in. Just look at what happened to Vault 19 and Vault 94. They don't salvage it. They don't pull apart its systems. They don't expose what happened. And that means the idea of a vault becoming a myth might be the most elegant security system Vault-Tec ever devised, intentionally or not. So when you connect all of this, everything that's been covered, explored, and explained, get ready for a grim answer. Here's the thread that ties the whole mystery board together. For some vaults, the all clear never came because it was never the point. It was a way of getting vaults to accept their conditioning, the promise that one day Vault-Tec and the civilized world would make their grand return, and they could set out and reclaim humanity and America's rightful place in the world. For other vaults, the data didn't disappear. It was never meant for us to find in the first place. It had already been taken away, transmitted, teleported to a location that maybe a future episode of the TV show or a future game may one day reveal. Or maybe it was never real to begin with. Another illusion by Vault-Tec. Perhaps the unfinished vaults weren't embarrassing accidents caused by incompetence, poor planning, contentment with the status quo. Maybe they were just experiments that started early, if only because the world ending puts a rather large delay on the idea of finishing on schedule. And maybe the vaults that became myths didn't become myths by chance. Maybe that was the final layer of one of the deepest and biggest mysteries that Vault-Tec, that the Fallout franchise, continues to linger and tease us with to this day. Because if Vault-Tec's success criteria wasn't simply to save humanity, but measure humanity, and measure it in all of the ways that were just discussed, then the Vault program doesn't look like a tragedy. It looks like a machine that worked exactly as designed. And the scariest part, we're still walking through the results. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to see what happened to every Vault experiment in Fallout, click the video on the screen.